Oh, alrighty. We've got an update. Here he is, happy as can be, purring like a machine again. Want to show him your boo boos? So he's got a little boo boo on his arm. Look at that. They shaved his arm. And but he's doing good. He's a big blob. They shaved his arms and his belly. They shaved his belly. But here he is, happy as a clam to be back home. Feisty as ever too. So that was good news. Anyway, here's the full story. So this morning, because I didn't hear anything from them last night, and they said they'd call me to see how the procedure went, because they were going to pull the catheter out and see if he'd go to the bathroom on his own. And I'm like, okay, and never got a call. I'm like, of course. So when I woke up this morning, I was like, I'm just going to go there. And about 15 seconds before I get there, they call and say, okay, he's ready. You can come home. I'm like, oh, good. Well, I'm pulling in right now. And so a few minutes later, not even a few minutes. Yeah, so I'm talking to him on the phone, and they go, okay, so we discussed the billing and so forth. And they said, okay, it's going to be such and such. And I'm like, what? That's like $500 more than what you told me it was going to be, because they gave me an estimate. It could be between 1,500 and 1,800 depending on how things go. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, what? And it's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I think we need to go over the details of the bill and find out what the heck, why it's so much. And he goes, okay, well, let me get you somebody in billing. And I'm like, okay. So I wait on hold for 10 minutes. Finally, somebody comes back on and says, oh, well, it looks like they charged you for these things and this thing and that thing. There's these duplicate charges all over the place. And they were like, well, we had 3 or 4 technicians working on it all weekend, so they just added certain things. I'm like, okay. So finally, they straighten it out. They get the billing all straightened out. I got that issue taken care of. Then it was at the dollar amount that they told me. I was like, okay, all right, let's just get him home. And a few minutes later, they bring him out in the cat carrier, and they bring me a bag with some medicine in it, and an IV bag. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And he's still got the IV in his arm or in his leg. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And the nurse says, are you bringing him right to the other vet? And I'm like, you're the vet. Why would I bring him to another vet? And I'm like, oh, well, we're the emergency vet, so the doctor said you should bring him to the regular vet. I'm like, why would I? I'm like, oh. She says, oh, well, I thought they told you. I'm like, well, let me go get the doctor. And I'm like, oh my God, Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, the cat's having a fit inside this car carrier because it's like this big, and the cat is this big. And he's tumbling around and rolling, flipping the thing over in the back seat. And I'm like, oh my God. And he's trying to get out because he can finally see me, and he just wants to be petted. And it's like, oh, come on, dude. I'm sorry. We're almost there. So the doctor comes out and says, hey, well, last night when we pulled the catheter out and we watched him to see if he could pee on his own, and he didn't really pee on his own, so we kind of squeezed his bladder and nothing really came out. So we're like, oh, you should bring him to the vet to keep an eye on him for the day and make sure he can go to the bathroom on his own. He's getting into stuff already. So I'm like, really, dudes? What's this going to be now? Another $500 to go to the other vet just to tell me he's going to, to watch him go to the bathroom? Oh, and I'm like, whatever. Just I got to get out of here. I got to get this cat out of here. And so I'm thinking, like, maybe I should bring him to the vet because he's got the IV in his hand. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with that crap and all this other this stupid shit. So I'm debating. I'm like, fuck it. I got to get him home. He's stressed out to the max, and I just got to get him home. I think if I can just get him home, relaxed a little bit, and maybe I'll go back a little bit later once he's calmed down. So he's just meowing and meowing and rowing and rowing and flipping over. And the cat carrier actually flipped over and fell on the floor. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to pick up this cat carrier in the back seat while I'm trying to drive. And I'm like, oh, it's just ridiculous. So finally I get home, rush in to bring him inside. I open the thing and he's just so happy to be out of that situation. And on the way home, I could tell he peed all over the cat carrier and all over himself. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess at least we know that you can go to the bathroom now. So that's a good sign. And so he's just sniffing around and so happy. And I gave him some food that I made especially for him from that's another whole story. I spent the weekend at the meat market finding bits and pieces of stuff he'd like. So anyway, so I got him this food and he just mowed down this enormous amount of food. I guess they didn't feed him very well over there. So after that, he was super happy. He's rubbing my face and just so glad to be back home. And then he goes to the bathroom and then he comes back out and he's like, ah. Then he goes back to the bathroom and I think he just felt a little, I think the stress and everything got to him. So he was just a little nervous. But finally, he's semi back to normal. And he's just like my cat again. It's like, oh, thank God, finally. But now I've got this stupid IV thing, and I'm like, should I bring him all the way to the vet, just to to get him back in the car carrier, back in the car, back to the vet? And I'm like, I can't do that. So I YouTubed how to remove an IV from a cat. Well, it was from a dog actually, and it was just remove the tape and pull and put a thing on it and a Band-Aid. I was like, oh, I can do that. No problem. So I get him on the blanket and I'm taking the tape off and he's freaking out. And I'm taking I spent a good hour trying to take this tape off. Now they use the most stickiest shit I could on fur, which is the dumbest friggin' idea. I don't know what these people are doing over there at that vet, but it took me a good hour to snip away at where the IV entered and where the tape was, and it's just because it's not comfortable, so he's squirming around, and finally I get the dangly piece off, and still the pieces inside his arm, and brilliant me says, okay, well, maybe I'll just have him relax a little bit. I'll snip that piece off so he doesn't trip over it and try to pull it off, because he still had that dome on his head, so he's bumping around into shit. And so I snipped the thing off, and then it started leaking and it's dripping blood. I'm like, oh no. So I'm like, ah, shit. Well, it's go time, because I can't let you drip all over the place. So I grabbed him and I put him on the shitty blanket again, and I just held onto him, and I'm tearing this tape off, and he's pissed because it hurts. Tearing the fur off, and he's jumping and jumping and jumping, and he's pissed and he's jumping, and finally I just ripped the tape off and he just jerked like a mother, and that's what happened right there. Nice slice. He just gouged me a good one. But I ripped the tape off and I pulled the catheter out and I put a Band-Aid on, and it was a bloody mess. I tell you, what a shit show that was. And but after that, he was like, okay, can I eat some more? I gave him a little bit more. He ate that, and so I left the dome on his head because I didn't want him licking it and all that fun stuff. So I left that on for a couple hours. And finally, I took it off when I got home, and now he's a real cat again. Jesus Christ, what an adventure! So any advice out there? Don't snip the end off of the IV thing before you have the tape free. So, all right. Well, there's the update. Cat's back to normal. So let's listen to some tunes, okay? All right. Cheers.